Well, welcome everybody. Let's go ahead and kick things off. If you still need to go to the back and grab some food or drink, feel free to do so. So I am very happy to introduce our speaker today. Jesús Fernández-Villaverde is the Howard Marks Presidential Professor of Economics, yay, at Penn, University of Pennsylvania. At Penn, he is also the director of the Penn Initiative for the Study of the Markets and co-director of Wharton's Business, Economic, and Financial History Project. He's a research associate at the National Bureau of Economic Research, which is the premier research organization for academic economists that produce much excellent research. He is a fellow or a visiting scholar at AEI, Civitas Institute at UT Austin, Econometric Society, and a past fellow at Hoover Institution at Stanford. He has a very large number of research articles, a lot of super interesting stuff, everything from quantum computing to machine learning to dynamic stochastic general equilibrium models and macroeconomics. So be glad you asked Professor Blanco for that first. And he has over 15,000 citations to his work in Google Scholar. So let's welcome Professor Fernández-Villaverde as he comes to speak to us on the future of life, the universe, and everything.
Yeah. Yes. So, talking about big topics, the demographic future of humanity is, I guess, as much of a big topic as anyone could imagine. And let me tell you what this is about. So humanity, I'm not talking about the United States, okay? Humanity is facing right now a global fertility crisis. And the global fertility crisis is actually much worse than any of you can think. So 2023, you probably spent 2023 not thinking much about it, but it was a landmark year in the history of humanity. Probably because we do not have terribly good data, but most likely it was the first time since humans appeared on this earth that our fertility rate dropped below replacement. Now, a lot of words over here, so don't worry, I will go over some of them in detail and I will fill in the ideas, but the replacement rate is the amount of children that a woman needs to have to keep population constant in the long run. Now, falling below replacement rate doesn't mean that population is still not growing. It will still grow for a few decades before of something called momentum, but you will see in a second how in some sense the demographic future of humanity has already been decided. In particular, most likely, given the current data, humanity's population will peak around 2055, maybe even a little bit earlier, and after that year, start decreasing. And the fall is going to be very, very fast and in a completely unprecedented way. So you look through the whole history of humanity, and not even during pandemics and wars, we experience that situation. Some of you are thinking, wow, World War II, a lot of people got killed in World War II. Yes, a lot of people got killed in World War II, but the population was growing so fast at the time that even if you take the casualties from the world population was still growing. Now, notice that I'm not saying the United States. A lot of people, when I bring this up to their attention, they say, oh, you are so worried about fertility in the United States. I will try to convince you that, funnily enough, the situation in the United States is bad, but that the situation in the rest of the world is much worse. So let me ask you a question. Which country has a higher fertility rate, the United States or Mexico? United States. Which country has a higher fertility rate, the United States or Brazil? Which country has a higher fertility rate, the United States or Iran? Which country has a higher fertility rate, the United States or Turkey? Okay? So the type of consequences that we are talking about here are worldwide. The demographic situation of Mexico, of Brazil, of Argentina, of Iran, of Turkey is going to be incredibly important for the next 80 years. And we will see in a second that the interaction of that with issues like migration is going to make it even more fundamental. In fact, once you start to think about demographics and fertility, it is nearly impossible to think about anything else. There is no more important topic on the planet right now. Okay, so let me tell you a couple of ideas. I already mentioned fertility rate, so let me be a little bit precise about what I mean by fertility rate. The total fertility rate is the average number of children that will be born to a woman over her lifetime if, one, she were going to experience the current age-specific fertility rates throughout her lifetime. That is, we look at an American woman and we say, imagine we have this synthetic woman who is going to have, on average, the same number of children that in 2024 an 18-year-old American woman had, and a 19-year-old American woman had, and a 20-year-old American woman had, and so on and so forth, and we sum over her lifetime. Now, this is tricky because that woman doesn't really exist. It's a synthetic creation, okay? And that implies there is some complications statistically about how you compute this. We can talk about those in the Q&A, but at this moment, let's imagine that economists are smart. Well, we don't need to imagine that, that's a fact. Economists are smart, and we have computed that properly. The second thing is that this person, this woman, is going to live all her way from 15 to 44, which in demography is considered the fertility age. Okay, you know, some women may have children after 45, but this is really very, very few. Okay, so it doesn't really matter. Okay. Why do we care about total fertility rate? Because it tells you whether or not in the long run a population is going to be growing or is going to be shrinking. And it's different from the number of actual births today. Let me give you an example from my own life. I have a father and a mother, and we are 4 brothers. My dad, my mom passed away some years ago, my dad only has 4 grandsons. Okay? So the Fernández-Villaverde population has kept growing. But when my dad passes away, and when I pass away, and my brothers and my sisters-in-law start passing away, the Fernández population will start shrinking. Why? Because our fertility rate was 1.0. So it's very important to distinguish between births from fertility. And that's why we care about fertility. Now, what I just told you about the Fernández-Villaverde family is called momentum. Even if none of my brothers nor myself had been very applied on this issue of sustaining the world population, this is not going to be really felt for a few more decades until we pass away. So in demographics, you always want to think about 20 years ahead, 30 years ahead. If you're going to ask me how many people are going to apply to college in 2042 in the United States, I can already tell you the ones that were born in 2024. That's done. Okay? So everything that is going to happen in 2042 in college applications, in some sense, has already been decided. Okay. So let me tell you about another concept, which is replacement rate. Replacement rate is the number of children that a population needs to have on average to keep population constant in the long run. And that replacement rate is defined as following. 1 plus the sex ratio at birth divided by the probability of a woman to survive to 30. And you're like, wow, how can anyone come up with such a crazy formula? Okay. Sex ratio at birth is the number of boys that are born per every girl. Turns out to be the case that in a population without any type of outside intervention, that ratio is 1.05. Okay, so if you just take a village with, let's say, 1,000 women, and we look at their births, and we don't do anything like abortions, selective fertility treatments, nothing whatsoever, there will be around 105 boys born for every 100 girls. Okay? And if you talk with biologists, they say this probably makes sense because the death rate of men is much higher when they are young than the death rate of women. Okay? So there are probably good biological reasons for doing that. Now, then what does it mean 1 plus 1.05, the numerator in this formula? That if a woman has 2.05 children, 1 will be a girl, 1.05 will be a boy. Okay, we are talking about averages. Why we are dividing by the probability of a woman to survive to 30? Because remember over here, she were to live between 15 to 44. So instead of looking at the probability year by year, which is kind of a difficult thing to do, we just take 30 because it's approximately at the middle. Okay, so let's think about that number. Let's think about an advanced country like the US. The replacement rate in a rich country is going to be 1 plus 105. In the US, there are not many selective abortions, divided by 0.98. So if we take 100 women, 100 girls, 98 of them will get to 30 years. And that gives you 2.1. And that's the number you will pick in the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal or the Financial Times, and they will mention 2.1 is the replacement rate. Turns out to be the case that as pretty much everything in life, the New York Times get it wrong. Because that's not the replacement rate for countries outside the United States. Why? Because first of all, in a lot of countries, there are selective abortions. Once the scanning technology was introduced in the 1970s, in countries like Pakistan, people are starting to abort girls at a very high rate. It means that in countries like Pakistan, you don't have 105 boys born for every 100 girls, you have 110. In countries like China and India, now things are getting a little bit better. It used to be as high as 115. Huge imbalance. And in addition to it, it's not that 98 of each 100 women survive to 30. Only around 90 of them survive. That means that the replacement rate for Pakistan is not 2.1, it's 2.33. Now, let's do this country by country in the world. Now, this is not a lot of fun, but you sit down, you put a football game on TV and go country by country and compute it, and you get that for the planet, the replacement rate is 2.2. Now, it looks like it's not a big difference, 2.1 versus 2.2, but it actually is a big difference. Why is a big difference? Because these are the total fertility rates that the United Nations computes. And I will tell you, by the way, in a second that the United Nations gets this wrong, but stay with me for a second. This is the 2024 numbers, and you can see how in the 1950s and 1960s, the total fertility rate of humanity was around 5. That was the times where people were talking about the population bomb. And we are going to get overcrowded. I remember when I was a small kid, my parents gave me this book of countries of the world. And there was a chapter, I remember, Mauritius. Anyone knows the small island of Mauritius in the Indian Ocean? And it was beautiful, look. But I remember vividly because it said, oh, Mauritius is so overcrowded and the fertility rate is so high, by the year 2000, they are going to starve to death and that's going to be a complete wasteland. Turns out to be the case. There are more deaths than births already in Mauritius. Mauritius is losing population, even without considering migration. Well, people were looking at that, and by the way, that's the reason why a lot of people, especially if they're a little bit older, and you tell them there is a fertility crisis, they will say, no, but people in Africa are having so many kids. No. Look at this. Has been going down, has been going down, has been going down. By now, we are around here. Now, this is what the United Nations forecast is going to happen, which is very clearly below 2.2, but you will see in a second, because this is really funny. Okay, I'm doing the same thing, but just blowing up to focus on the most recent years, and you can see how, according to the United Nations, we are slightly above 2.2. And I told you that the replacement rate for the world population was 2.2. So you were saying, hey, Jesus, you started this telling me this should be, we are already below. But this is still a little bit above. And I'm going to tell you, the United Nations is really funny. So I'm actually about to circulate a paper with Patrick Norrick, which basically says that the United Nations statistics are based on the Enron textbook on accounting. You don't really know Enron anymore, so that's a joke that only shows my age, okay? So Enron was this company that basically argued that they were making tons of money and it was all a lie. Okay, so this is what the United Nations claim how many Colombians are being born in any given year, around 700,000. I pick Colombia because I actually know a lot, I have a lot. My postdoc is Colombian, and I know a lot of people in Colombia, and I have talked with the people at the National Statistics Institute in Colombia, and I have asked, you guys say that this is the number of births 2022 and 2023. And the United Nations says that number. Which one is true? They tell me, Jesus, I promise you, is this number. We do not miss people in Colombia. Okay? Colombia, yes, is not Switzerland, it's not Denmark, it's not the most advanced country in the world, but we know how many people are being born. In fact, this is a slightly over 500,000. In 2024, the numbers just came out. I should have updated this graph, but they came out like 3 days ago. They had 415,000 births. Okay? The United Nations claim they are going over 700. Turns out to be the case. I can do this for pretty much every country in the world. The United Nations only agrees with one country in their national statistics of births. Anyone can guess? This is hilarious. There is only one country that the United Nations is absolutely 100% convinced that their national statistics is 100% accurate. No, it's slightly more significant from a perspective of demographics. China, a country well known for their openness in their statistics and the accurate, they have never ever lied about anything whatsoever. And yet the United Nations says, we do not trust Norway, but we do trust China. I don't know, anyone knows any Norwegian? The most boring people in the world. I mean, they're the type of people that they will cross the street on, they will never cross the street out of a pedestrian pass, even if it's 3 a.m. in the middle of the night and there is no car, okay? Well, apparently the United Nations says Norwegian birth data, we don't believe it. China, we do believe it. But anyway, so let me show you then countries in the world from the United Nations data. So I'm going to still believe them with those crazy, overestimation. These are countries in the world in blue that are below 2.1. And remember, for a lot of these countries, the replacement rate is above 2.1. And countries in red that are below 2.1. You can see in the Americas, pretty much everyone is gone. Okay? Now, even in this graph, you will see things like Nicaragua or Panama they are already below 2.1. Okay, if you actually look at their national statistics, they are below 0.1. Bolivia and Paraguay, borderline, for sure, Bolivia and Paraguay will be below 2.1 in a couple of years. So in the whole of the Americas, there is no one left. No one left in Europe, no one left in Asia except, these Central Asian republics and Africa. And I'm going to come back to Africa in a second. Okay? So when people is telling you that fertility is falling, this is not about rich people in Malibu not having kids. This is about no one is having kids in Chile right now. Okay? Chile has a lower fertility rate than Vermont. So let me skip this. And let's focus then on the United States. So the total fertility rate in the United States in 2023 was 1.6. In 2024, it's going to be roughly 1.6 as well. We seem to have been able to stabilize it. The US has not been at 2.1 since the mid-1970s. Okay? So we have been for over 50 years having a deficit. Now, 10, 15 years ago, the deficit was around 1.1, 0.2, and you could fill in that deficit with people like me, with funny accents, immigrants. Okay? The problem is that right now, the deficit is 0.5. So you either start bringing a lot of a heck of immigrants, and we can come back to that later on, or the US population will start falling soon. In fact, if we condition on both of your parents having born in the US population has already been falling for around 10 years or so. Okay? All the growth in population right now in the US comes from people like me or my brother and the kids of the Villaverdes immigrants into the US. Now, it has been falling very fast since 2008, the fertility rate. It seems to have stabilized around 2023, 2024. Knock on wood, and let's hope it keeps stabilizing. Why has it fallen so much in the US? Basically, because fertility among Hispanics has converged very, very quickly to the fertility of non-Hispanic whites, and the fertility of African Americans has also been falling very, very fast. Okay? So there seems to be a convergence. Now, pretty much all groups in the US have roughly the same fertility rate, except Asian Americans that have a much lower fertility rate than everyone else. Now, as I was mentioning before, the situation in the US is dire. It's much worse everywhere else. Okay? To the point that if I were going to have 30 minutes with a president of the United States, I don't think any president will ever give me 30 minutes. But if I had 30 minutes to talk with the president of the United States, I will only talk about fertility. Okay? This is the fundamental crisis of our time. When I say that at Penn, maybe you guys hear a little bit different, I immediately get a kid who says, no, it's climate change. No, it is not climate change. And let me tell you why. At a very fundamental technical level, we have fixed the problem of climate change. We know how to transition to net zero at a reasonable economic cost. Okay? We know how to have solar power, we know how to have nuclear, we know how to have wind, we know how to have electric cars. We know how to use hydrogen to substitute oil even for chemicals. It's just an issue of cost. And because it's an issue of cost, there is a political fight about how to do that transition efficiently. Problem is, we don't really know how to get people to have more children. And we are going to come back to that. So in the year 2050, no one is going to remember climate change because it will be a fixed problem. Everyone is going to be talking about what do we do with the global fertility crisis. Okay, just before we move on, and I tell you a little bit about the economic consequences, a few funny graphs. I was telling you that the United Nations lives in some type of, I don't know how to say, Disneyland world. So This is what they, look, this is the fertility of the US. You see, I was telling you how it went down very, very quickly. The United Nations assumes not only it will stop falling, but it will actually increase a little bit. I don't know. Anyone took a class like in business administration? Imagine that I go and I show you that graph and you say, look, this has been my performance so far. This is, you know, give me $20 million for the next equity round for this firm. I promise you, none of the Wharton kids will give you $20 million. But this is even better. This is what the United Nations assumes about South Korea. Okay? South Korea now has a fertility rate of 0.7. 0.7. You know how I like to tell that story? Imagine your high school class. It's a very funny high school class of 100 people. And it's very funny. It's a very romantic high school. The 50 boys date the 50 girls, and all of them get married. So you have 50 happy couples. Okay? Because the fertility rate is 0.7, those 100, the class of 100 students will only have 35 kids. So in the next generation, the high school will go from 100 to 35. Now let's think about the second generation. Again, a very romantic high school. 35 is uneven, is an odd number. I should pick 36, but just stay with me, okay? So you have 18 couples now, 36. I'm generous, I'm kind of rounding it up. And those 18 couples will have 14 kids. So in 2 generations, that high school is going to go from 100 students to 14 students. That's basically what is going to happen to Korea. It's already happening. If you want, later I can tell you some anecdotes about the situation in Korea. The United Nations said, oh, don't worry, this is going back. Why? It's hilarious. I actually think I took it out, but in another presentation that I have a little bit more cheeky, I actually quote directly from the report, and they say, South Korea is going to make big improvements in gender equality and inclusion. And because we are going to apply the gender equality and inclusion approach, that's what is going to happen. And what I put in that is, I wonder, you know, the guy who had to write that, you know, how he could do it. I mean, it was just, anyway. China, they are also kind of quite optimistic about what is going to happen with China. Oh, this is even better. India. India is just going to stop. Okay, they are never going to go, which doesn't make any sense. Okay, if you know anything about fertility in India, India is going to have the same level of fertility that China has now in 10 more years. Okay. Chile again, a recovery. Anyway, I think I have made the point. Okay, so summary of the first 26 minutes of the presentation. Fertility is falling everywhere in the planet very fast. It's falling in religious countries and it's falling in secular countries. It's falling in rich countries and it's falling in poor countries. It's falling in countries with left-wing governments and it's falling in countries with right-wing governments. It's falling in countries that, you know, help women a lot, and it's falling in countries that do not help women a lot. It's falling everywhere. And even in the US, it's falling a lot, it's not falling as much, and it's in other countries. Okay. Now you're probably thinking, okay, fine, but what should I care? Okay, this is the moment where, you know, I'm usually explaining it to my nephews. They are rolling their eyes and say, okay, my crazy uncle telling me something extremely boring. Why should you care about this? Okay. Now, I'm going to tell you what I'm going to call the unpleasant arithmetic of demographics. I'm going to have a couple of formulae, but don't worry, it will not be too difficult. Okay, so a basic accounting identity, this is an identity, okay? This is no economic theory, it's just definitions. Is that output is equal to labor productivity times labor. Okay, you can cancel the L over here and you see that you get back the original left-hand side. Now, this is the part where maybe some of you don't remember, but trust me, you can take derivatives, you can take logs and derivatives with respect to time, and this basically tells you that output growth is equal to labor productivity growth plus labor growth. Okay, and that's just accounting, nothing else. no economic theory whatsoever. Okay. So let me tell you about the US circa 2000. In the US, around that time, labor productivity growth was around 2% a year. Okay? So it's really interesting. If you actually look at the productivity growth of the US, is we start having good data. So the good data for the US starts in 1865, right at the end of the Civil War. Until today, labor productivity has been growing 2% a year, more or less. Some years are a bit faster, some years are a bit lower, but it's remarkable how stable it has been. At that time, labor growth was around 1% a year. Why? You know, the kids of the baby boomers were now entering into the labor force. A lot of immigrants like me. So 2% productivity growth plus 1% labor growth means that on an average year, the US economy will grow at around 3%. Now, if the economy is doing a little bit better, you know, employment is falling, whatever reason the economy is growing, you do a little bit better, you grow at 4%. If the economy is not doing so well, for whatever the reason, you grow at a 2%. But basically, normal is 3%, sometimes a little bit more, sometimes a little bit less. Everyone with me? Very good. Fast forward to the US in 2050. Let's suppose, and this is a big buy, that labor productivity will still grow at a 2% a year. And I'm going to try to tell you why it's very hard for me to believe that labor productivity will still grow at a 2% with a very old society. But just for the moment. Labor growth is falling at a 1%. And I already told you, this is already baked in. Okay? This is literally the fact that I go to the Children's Hospital of Pennsylvania and I walk into the maternity ward. Well, now they don't call it maternity ward, but that's fine. You walk into the maternity ward and you ask them, how many kids were born here last year? And they tell me, 222. Those are the people who will get into the labor force in 2050. Okay, you know, they need to go to high school, to college, to masters, etc. So that's already baked in into the pie. 2% labor productivity growth minus 1% labor growth, 1% output. That means that in a good year, we will grow 2%. What was before a bad year, it will become a good year. And in a bad year, you will grow at 0. You know how we call this? 5 letters word? Japan. And this is how I got into this research myself. Macroeconomists had to spend 20 years writing papers, what is wrong with Japan? Oh, is the Bank of Japan being full of idiots that they don't know how to do monetary policy? And I was like, a lot of my friends are Japanese. They seem pretty smart to me. How can it be that they are missing something so obvious? So I just went to the data. And I had, with a few economists, what the British will call refreshingly honest conversations. And I got to the conclusion, and I have published many papers, that there is nothing wrong with Japan. Japan labor growth, labor population is just falling at a 1% a year. And with a 2% labor productivity growth, what else can happen with Japan? So the present of Japan, of 25 years of economic stagnation, is actually the future of the United States. And in fact, what I have argued is that if you control for labor growth, Japan has been doing better than the US over the last 25 years. So there is nothing wrong with Japan. There are just fewer Japanese. And let me tell you why this matters. And this matters in figures that are difficult for humans to even understand. Now, I don't know how many of you take a basic class in asset pricing or finance, but the basic formula that I teach the MBAs at Wharton is the following. The value of a company, V, is just the dividend that that company gives, divided by the growth rate of the dividend R, the interest rate R, minus the growth rate of the company G, of the dividend. Let's think about the US in the same way. This is just a very simple way to think about the present value of the US wealth. If we take the US when we were growing at a 3% a year, the US GDP in 2023, I'm taking the last numbers, doing for 2024 will be a little bit bigger, so it will be even better for my argument, is $27 trillion and a little bit of change. I plug in a reasonable rate of interest, which is 4%. I subtract the 3% over here. The valuation of the US economy is $2.7 quadrillion. That's what I'm telling you. These are numbers that are even difficult to wrap your head about. I mean, what even is $1 quadrillion? A lot of a heck of money. Okay, a ridiculous amount of money. Now let's suppose that we go to the much lower fertility rate, so we are only going to grow 1% on average. The valuation of the US economy is $918 trillion. So basically, the fact that we are going to start losing population is going to cost us $1.8 quadrillion. You see what I want to talk with the president for 30 minutes about this? 1.8 quadrillion. I mean, we're talking about here, like what? Elon Musk is talking about saving 200 billion with dogs. I mean, that's peanuts. Who cares about $200 billion? That's not even a rounding error. We are talking about $1.8 quadrillion. And by the way, a lot of you are going to tell me, but we are also going to be fewer people. Yes, we are going to be fewer people, but we will need to still pay for Social Security. We still need to pay for Medicare. We still need to pay for the interest on our public debt, of our government federal debt. And personally, and now I need to disclose my own political affiliations, we need to pay for national defense. Okay? We really need those aircraft carrier groups in the Pacific in 2040. And someone needs to pay for them. And we can pay our Navy with $2.7 quadrillion, or we can pay for our Navy with $900 trillion. And tell me, which of the two do you think will be easier? Now, immigrants, people like you, Jesus, people that has last names no undergrad has ever been able to spell. Well, not so easy as it seems. And it's not so easy because remember I told you, fertility is falling everywhere in the world. A lot of people do not appreciate that. But it has already been over a decade that net migration with Mexico is negative. A lot of immigrants return to their home countries after a few years. Only around 40 to 45% of immigrants eventually return to their home countries. Okay? There is so many immigration from Mexico. There was so much immigration from Mexico into the US in the 1990s and 2000s that now that fertility has dropped a lot in Mexico, there are more Mexicans coming back. I actually have a friend who's a real estate developer in Los Angeles, in LA, told me I'm already switching a lot of my units for Mexican immigrants into units for hipsters. And then you're saying, okay, this doesn't make any sense, Jesus, because you are telling me that, but on the other hand, what about the south border crisis? Don't we have all these people crossing the frontier? Well, first of all, a lot of them are from Venezuela. And this has nothing to do with fertility. It happens to be related with elect a socialist president and you will see what happens. Everyone wants to leave the country. Second, and most important, a lot of the new immigrants into the US from Latin America are from Honduras, Guatemala, Nicaragua, etc. They are not from Mexico, which are countries that are just 10, 15 years behind. And I can tell. I can tell the difference in accents. And I don't know how often you go and try to buy burritos, but in Santa Barbara, it used to be the case that the truck in front of where I was staying will say, true Mexican food. And I noticed the other day when I arrived, it said, true Honduran food. That's the change in demographics in Mexico, right there. I can make a photograph in Santa Barbara and show it to you. But Honduras is going to be below replacement rate already in 1 or 2 years. So even if the US wanted to bring immigrants, it's not clear that they are out there. But second, and most importantly, because we are not talking here about bringing 1 million, 2 million, 5 million immigrants. We are talking about here bringing hundreds of millions of immigrants. Okay? And I just don't think that societies can assimilate that many immigrants. Okay? The way I have always thought about immigration is, look, I was raised on a very heavy doses of Aristotle. Okay? I went to a Catholic school, Catholic university, so everything started with, as Aristotle says. And the main idea of Aristotle in the politics and in the Nicomachean ethics is the idea that virtue is in the middle. It's probably silly to have zero immigration. It's absolutely crazy to have 3 million immigrants a year. Both extremes do not make any sense. You cannot, as a country, as a society, assimilate 3 million new people every year. And I'm saying that as someone who will say, how are you doing? Okay? So it's very good to bring people like me, not 3 million people like me in a year. So the amount of immigrants that we can bring to the US is humongous. But there is even a more subtle point, which is actually something where every time I say this, a lot of even economists look at me and say, how can that be? I never thought about it. Okay. The US is a welfare state. Okay? In the welfare state, there are people who contribute a lot because they make a lot of money and they pay a lot in federal taxes. And there are people who do not pay that much but draw a lot. For instance, Social Security. I'm a great deal for Social Security. Okay, I pay the maximum level of payroll taxes. That should not be a surprise to you. And fine, I'm going to draw Social Security for a reasonable number of years. But if you look at the actuarial value of me to the Social Security, I'm a net winner for the Social Security. Turns out to be the case, the average immigrant into the United States is not. Because it's not going to be making a lot of money, it's not going to be paying a lot of taxes. Now, this is not saying that I only value immigrants based on their fiscal value, okay? Don't get me wrong. I'm just making a very particular argument. If you think that the economic problems of the US are fixed with more low-skilled immigration, the answer is not. And the answer is not because of the structure of the welfare state, where if you are roughly below 70% of income level, you are not a net contributor to the system. And again, a guy who comes to the US and is in the 50th percentile may bring a lot of great things. Okay, maybe a great artist, a great humanitarian can bring a lot of good things to the US. What he's not bringing is a better fiscal position. I am bringing a better fiscal position because, well, I don't know, you can imagine, I'm a full professor at an Ivy League, I'm in the top 10% of income in the US. So I contribute to the system. The guy who cleans my pool in the summer does not contribute to the system. Okay, and again, the guy who cleans my pool, I love him, he's a nice chap. It's not that I'm thinking about him as a discounted present value object. I'm just saying, hey, you are not helping the accounts of the US. So if you think this can be solved about migration, the answer is not. I have only 3 minutes and I promise I finish. What can we do? Okay, this is very tricky. We are not 100% sure how to fix this problem. After having thinking a lot about this, I think the US national strategy number 1 should be to increase our total fertility rate to around 1.8, 1.9. Why not 2.1? I just think it can be done. Okay, I'm realistic, so I just want to go from an abyss, a precipice in fertility, to a gentle slope and hope for the best. How can we do this? Well, the only thing that we know in economics and the population is to get people married. And by people getting married, I don't mean living together. Can I say sin over here since you are a Christian institution? I'm not living here about cohabitation. I'm talking about this, a wedding ring, I mean about Uncle Leo making embarrassing jokes at the wedding reception, a banquet, a tacky white limo, a cheesy honeymoon in the Bahamas. Okay? If you actually condition on being married, fertility has not dropped in the United States. Actually, slightly over 100% of the drop in fertility in the US is because young people are not getting married. And by the way, in terms of fertility, living with someone in the same room and doing all those type of things is not being married. And if you want, I can show you tons of evidence. People who are doing those, for instance, do not share a checking account. Okay? You start sharing a checking account the day you get married. So we need to get people married. That's our first national priority. Now, I wish I had more time to go over this in detail. So what I'm going to strongly recommend two books. Get Married, Why Americans Might Defy the Elites, Forge Strong Families and Save Civilization by Brad Wilcox, and The Two-Parent Privilege, Melissa Kearney. Two fantastic books. You need to get married. Okay, I know, I sound like your grandmother, but your grandmother was right. Okay, why marriage? Married people are happier people. And by the way, this is already, for those of you who know about selection bias, this is already controlling for the fact that people who get married tend to be different. Married people are healthier and live longer, especially men. If I was not married, there will be no green food that will cross the threshold of my house. Okay, the only reason I eat green things is because I'm married. Married people have more children. Married people are better educated children. Married people have more successful children. Married people have children that have less behavioral issues at the school. Married people commit less crimes. Married people get less parking tickets. If you think about it, this is absurd. Why in the fact? To tell you the truth, I can't understand, because just the idea that I will need to go back home and say, Gina, I got a parking ticket. I just, hear her complaining for half an hour. I say, well, I better, use the app and put $1. Okay? Married people get less fine parking tickets. Married people are overly mobile. Married people use less welfare. Married people join the local bowling club more often. They go more to church. They contribute more to church, to the basket when the collection comes. Okay? So we really, really need to get people married. I'm running over time, so I'm going to stop here. What do we need to get people married? Two main things: marriage-friendly taxation and affordable housing. And then at a bigger level, we really need to change the culture. And that's something that, as an economist, I know less. And maybe sociologists, public policy experts may have something better and more insightful to say. But we really need to start having books and movies. And sorry, I'm going to quote Jean Paul II. I hope no one bothers, but one of his favorite quotes that I always like to mention is, as the family goes, so goes the nation, and so goes the whole world in which we live. Okay? The fundamental future of the US depends on getting people married. Okay, I stop here.
That's for questions. And make, sorry, questions. Big long comment. Put a question mark at the end. So Tim Carney was here last fall, and he had showed us a graph where it was looking at the amount of children women want to have and the amount of children end up having. And obviously both are going down. But in recent years, the amount of children they end up having is going down quicker than the amount they end up wanting, which obviously suggests like women still want to have children.
Yes.
They're just not able to. So what do you think is contributed to that?
Okay. So first of all, that's a fantastic question, because when I'm giving these talks, I gave this talk at Harvard. Man, you should have read the Harvard Crimson the next day, what they say about yours truly. It was really hilarious. Anyway, Something I always want to make very clear, and I should have said, I want people to have more children, but I want to always do it respecting the dignity and the freedom of everyone. I don't want to force absolutely anyone into doing something that they don't want to do. What I see right now, and you're absolutely right, is that women are telling, not in the United States, all across the world, I want to have more kids, and I don't have them, and I cannot have them. A very good friend of mine, Aris Evans, has been conducting interviews with women in over 100 countries. Universal statement. Why do I think this is happening? Now, I will say there are two stories that we need to address, three. One, housing, okay? Look, it cannot be the case that a startup home is $500,000, okay? Or even more. Look, the US is a pretty big country. We have enough space. You know, there's enough space just in the great state of Texas to give every single household in the US a half an acre single family home. Okay, it's a pretty big state. We are not running out of land in any meaningful way. What we are running out is of land that you will get a permit to build on. So affordable housing, there is also a lot of things about architects are really evil people, and they are forcing a lot of regulations on the type of houses that need to be built, the type of, my brother is an architect, that's why I know they are evil. And the way they think about the world is really a very anti-family world. So affordable housing, number one. Number two, this I went a little bit too fast. I hope no one will take offense to this. But I guess after everything I have said, it's probably too late. We are overeducating many people in the country right now. Okay? Pretty much every major where the world studies on it has a negative net value. Even at Penn, there is actually good data that everyone who majors in all those places you can imagine. We are basically overeducating a lot of our current generation. That means that they are delaying their marriage age, they have huge student debts, and they just want to marry later. Look, there are plenty of good jobs out there that do not need college. I think too many people are going to college right now. Okay? And it's actually interesting to see because precisely where college is falling down very fast right now is among men. And there is a lot, again, the New York Times will tell you this is a crisis. No, I say men are figuring it out that college is not such a great investment, and women may be a little bit behind. And the third one is we really have a problem with the top 25% of men in the country. What do I mean by that? We have changed our educational system, and we have changed a lot of our social norms. A lot of those changes were good and positive because made a much more equal society and open to all. But it also means that at this moment, the educational system is not offering a good set of, or a good path to men. And we have 25% of men that wake up in the morning, spend time playing video games, and are just 100 admirable material. No, that's true. I mean, I probably some of you on the other side of the market will agree with me. There is a lot of men who are just not good marriage material. And we need to fix that. We need to really push the button. And in fact, the way you can, I get to you in a second. The way you can tell is where marriage has been falling the most is among non-college educated people, just because they are not good partners.
I have a follow-up question.
Yeah.
I'm a working mom.
Yes.
My husband works full-time.
Mm-hmm.
I have a relatively flexible job. Have you thought about it? I know you say family-friendly policy.
Yes.
But you really need mother-friendly.
Yes. Exactly. So I'm going to tell you an anecdote. You see what this thing is? Child seat laws. There is actually pretty good evidence that the introduction of child seat laws lower fertility. Why? Look, we were 5 brothers. I mentioned that before. My father will just squeeze all of us in the second row of the car, and the dog and a couple of extra bags. Now my brother, even if he wants, cannot really have more than 2 kids because the back of the car doesn't. So now, yeah. Exactly, a minivan. So the point I have tried to make in a lot of other papers is, look, I'm not saying, let's increase the number of children that die in car accidents. That's not what I'm trying to say. Is we have built a society that many times with good intentions have made very difficult to have families. And in particular, it makes very difficult for mothers to have families and have a career. And we need to step back and rethink about it. I tend to be pro-free markets. I tend to think that markets do a good job in general. This is one of the areas where I think that maybe a little bit of gentle nudge by the government can help a lot. For instance, that the school districts have a start of the class day and end of the class day that make it sensible for people to have kids. Of course, that's because of teachers' unions. Okay? Well, that's something that needs to change. We need to think about parental leaves, policies, yes, childcare, a lot of things that we need to do. So I wish I had 6 hours to talk about this because, I have been thinking about many of those things. When I say it's a national priority, I'm not kidding. I'm not trying to be cheeky for the effect. I'm saying we need people sitting down and say, how can I convince you to have kids? Okay? And I need to figure it out. Why are you reluctant to have a kid? And maybe it's just because it's impossible to have a child sit in the back row. Maybe it's because the school starts too early. Maybe, as you say, because for a woman, it's very difficult to coordinate those things. And this is a national priority. There is nothing as important as this. And we really need to redesign society for society to be children-friendly and to be family-friendly. This is our absolute priority as a nation. Family needs to be first and foremost the most important thing that we do.
Maybe this could build off that question, but I think uncertainty undoubtedly plays a huge role in setting up family.
Yeah.
And so I guess how do you combat sort of these new societal uncertainties revolving around AI or like cryptocurrency, the fact that you can make more than someone's annual salary with like one TikTok. So people just don't know how to plan for the future. So how do you combat all these new dynamics?
Yeah. So first of all, as I was mentioning before, trying to tell the undergrads, look, okay, don't get obsessed with whatever you read in the newspaper yesterday. Okay, a lot of that is just copy to fill the newspaper. Don't worry about it. Second thing, I truly believe that a lot of young people in the world right now are underestimating how quickly your ability to get pregnant drops after you are 30. Okay? It gets very difficult. Even if you go very aggressive in a lot of treatments, and I know that some of you may agree with them, some of you may not agree with them. And I think a lot of people are basically banking on when I'm 38, I'm going to be able to pick up the lost time, and it turns out to be the case. It's very difficult. Okay? And again, coming back to just saying, guess what? Maybe you do not really need that master in psychology. You just get married already and start having kids. And that has a lot to do with culture, as I was saying before. Yeah. So this is the US. If I don't put the axis at the bottom and I say, when was COVID? Okay. So no, pandemic doesn't really have anything to do with this. Now, what seems to be happening is that the rate of decline accelerated around 2015, before the pandemic. Conjecture, and I emphasize the word conjecture, this is the first generation with social media. Social media, the first generation that finds that it's more fun to spend Saturday night playing a video game or talking with someone on TikTok than going to a bar with a date. And remember, this is everywhere in the planet. I really want to emphasize, ask yourself, is whatever reason I have in my head US specific? If this is about the US, then you are probably wrong. Okay? Again, people are having fewer children in Tehran than in LA. Keep that in mind. Okay? My favorite, I gave you a couple of questions before. Another of my favorite questions when I talk with journalists is I'm going to give you 4 cities, and I'm going to ask you to rank them from the lowest fertility to the highest fertility. Mexico City, Santiago de Chile, the capital of Chile, Bogota, LA. LA has the highest fertility. Okay? And it's not that here in LA, you know, you are into a lot of family-friendly policies. So if you think that the problem of people not having children in LA is something very specific about LA, you are probably wrong. People are not having children in Bogota. People are not having children in Istanbul. And it's because of something. And my particular view is that social media actually plays quite a bit of a role. Yes.
Do you think because of social media, sometimes I see scrolling TikTok, Instagram, many women in their 30s are making statements saying, don't have kids. Like they're telling women in their 20s to not have kids and focus on your career. And so that's why we see higher rates of women going into master's programs, doctorate programs. Is that a big factor of why women are not having kids in their 20s or even early 30s?
Yeah, I think part of it is it. I think that personally, and the jury is still a little bit out because we still don't have very compelling evidence. To me, a very important part of the story is that you look at the average undergraduate at Penn right now, and it has much lower social skills than 20 years ago. Okay? The undergrad in 2002, 2003 had spent high school years going to parties and interacting with people in social gatherings. The current undergrad in 2025 has spent high school texting in Snapchat or whatever that thing is called. They just don't know how to interact. I mean, you should see the emails that I get. I'm not talking, no, seriously. No, this is like, has anyone, and this didn't happen in 2005, and it's not that they are trying to be disrespectful in any way, yeah? No, you say, this is not how you address an email to someone who is 30 years older than you. Okay, and I don't think they are doing it in a bad, disrespectful way, or they are trying to be mean, or they don't like me. I just think that they literally have not been properly socialized because they spend the whole high school, playing on Discord.
So to pivot completely differently.
Okay.
I'm still not fully convinced that GDP per capita is still not the more important, right? And then, because, our Navy shrinks because we don't have as much money. Well, maybe the other countries, they also don't have as much kids, so their Navy has to shrink.
Yes.
Right? Obviously, our aging population, that's a different factor, right? But it seems that that GDP per capita is still arguably more important than the overall growth.
Okay.
Even if there are a couple things like the military and our aging population that don't.
So let's forget the military for a second, because as you say, maybe China will not have kids either. First of all, we have the government debt. Okay, and that we need to pay. And government debt keeps going up.
We can just erase it all.
Second, I think that people often underestimate how incredibly costly population aging is for the federal government. So let me give you just one concrete example. Sorry if I'm going to quote Spain. I just finished a book on fiscal policy on Spain, but whatever has happened to Spain is going to be the US in 30 years. In 2007, the Spanish government had a surplus of 0.7% over GDP. Last year, 2024, had a deficit of 3%. And the interesting thing is that if you look at the point in the business cycle, we are roughly in the same point at the business cycle. So we have government deficit minus 3.7, from a surplus of 0.7 to a deficit of 3, minus 3.7. Just the increase in social security payments has been 4.5% of GDP. Okay, so just the increase in social security payments is 120% the increase in government deficit. You say, well, let me think about it in a different way. it means that the rest of the government has shrunk by 0.8. Coming back to national defense, we don't really have an army anymore. But we are not being able to invest in infrastructure. We are not able to invest in public education. We are not able to invest in a lot of other things. Look, a very good friend of mine, Leo Henian, I don't know if you know him, he's at Hoover. One of the arguments he has made about California is why have services in California like firefighters deteriorate so much over the last 20 years? Because the payments to retired civil government workers in California had grown so much that they have basically eaten the rest of the government deficit. There is just no more money in the state budget. And this is what is going to happen. The cost of Social Security payments and the cost of Medicare is going to eat the whole federal budget. And in 2050, there's just not going to be a space for anything else. And we are going to have a national crisis, as we are having a national crisis in Europe right now. I mean, the only thing, sorry, and I know this is a very long answer, I'll try to wrap up. I only want to emphasize you something. I'm not telling you about hypothetical future. I have seen it. It's called Europe, it's called Japan. You are only a 6 hour, well, if you are in the East Coast here, 9 hours plane flight for seeing it on your own eyes. Okay? Everything in Spain and in Europe in general is about Social Security payments because we are bankrupt. We are truly bankrupt.
Let's just call it an official end now, and anyone who needs to can go. Anyone who wants to stay, I'm sure Jesus would love to chat with you as we do, but let's thank them together.